Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Power Man Podcast. My name is Rory Paquette, and I am, as always, your incredibly grateful host. Thank you so much for being here today. We have a fantastic guest, and I am just beyond grateful to be here, to be doing this for a living, to be interacting with you folks. I say this all the time, and I'm going to keep saying it until the day I die, which hopefully is a long way away. But this podcast, me sitting here, this awesome guest sitting across the table from me, none of us exist without you folks. So thank you. Every single time you hit that play button, you make our lives wonderful, and I appreciate all of your part in all of that. So here we are, another wonderful episode. And before we get going, if you're a friend of the program, you know what we have to do. Got to pay a couple of bills. So we're going to take a sip of our preferred beverage. Oh, and it's really, really hot. It's really hot because I just made it about 2 minutes ago. All right. Whew. If you're a friend of the program, and I know you are, you know that we're drinking Freedom Hill Coffee at Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram. They brew a mean bean. It's a delicious cup of Joe. It's deep, dark, rich, bold, and beautiful, just like my wife. It's absolutely fantastic. They do all the right things for all the right reasons, and they support veterans, which you guys all know we are passionate about doing here on this show. Without those veterans, folks, I don't get to have my opinion. My guest doesn't get to have his opinion, and we don't get to spread that opinion to you, and you don't get to listen to us. So you know what? Thank you so much for all of your support. Look them up at Freedom Hill Coffee on Instagram and tell them Power Man sent you. Now that we're done with that, let's move on to this awesome part of the show. I have a guest on today. I didn't even realize that we knew each other, to be honest, until we got on screen today. This fantastic guy is part of a group that I'm in also for one of my other podcasts. He has nine podcasts. So as soon as I heard that, I'm humbled over here because I, I have like three, and I think I'm working hard. This guy's got nine. The one we're here to talk about today is called Dad Space, the Dad Space podcast. He's got a great story. He's a fellow empty nester. Please welcome to the program, David Campbell. David, how you doing, man?
Rory, I bring you greetings from Canada. Glad to be here with you. You are a great community builder and all the things that you do for podcasters. And I just want to say thank you on behalf of the group. I don't know if everybody gets a chance to say thank you, but as part of your podcaster nation, I just want to say thanks for all you do.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. You're going to make me blush again. Okay. I mean, you said thank you in the pre-interview. I thought we were done. Come on now.
Yeah, come
Okay.
on,
This
come
is
on now.
Power Man. I have to look tough on this program.
Okay.
All right. But thank you for that. I appreciate that. You mentioned that you followed, some of my health journey on that podcast too, and everybody here knows all about it. And I'm not going to bore everybody with it, but the outpouring of support from the podcasting community was insane. It was one of the things that really did get me through. And we had people even reaching out to my wife, about that stuff. So it was great, and I do appreciate those remarks, comments. Thanks for that.
It's amazing how community comes around you, right?
Yeah,
These
very cool.
listeners, these people in your community, how they show up for you. It's happened for me and my show as well. And the people are so amazing. So everyone listening here, thank you for supporting Rory and thank you for being part of his audience, his community. I know it means a lot to him to have you listen to his show. So thanks for being here.
Thanks, David. Now listen, we're here to talk about you and your show.
Come
All
on.
right, so quit changing the subject. Let's
I'm a
get back.
podcaster, right?
Let's
That's what
I
we do,
know. Let's get back
right?
on track here. You have a podcast that I think is great, Dad Space Podcast. Okay.
Hmm.
You told me before the show a little bit about how you came up with this, but tell everybody else, what made you want to start a podcast about dads?
I am an empty nester dad. I have three adult children, all in their mid to late 20s, all left the house during the global event, which we will kind of pass over that. But they all were in relationships. They were all dating. They were all having great times up to that event. And when our employers said that we had to reduce our footprint of where our children go during the day and evenings so that we could continue working, we went to our kids and said, listen, we need you guys to stay home for a while. We're thinking it'd be a few weeks, right? It's just going to be a short-term thing. And they all decided that, nope, this is the time to leave the house. And within about 3 months, we went from a full house of five to just my wife and I, because they all decided to go off to be with their partners and that start their new life. It just kind of accelerated
Yeah.
something that we thought would take years to happen, happened in months. And it was devastating to us because we're a pretty close type family. And to know that all three kids decided to use that opportunity to pursue something new for them, we're happy for them. But the process was very, very hard for my wife and I to go through, and to go through that unexpectedly. Like we didn't have really a long runway to that. It just happened. So
Yeah.
in that, I found some time in my calendar, and I knew that there was other dads who, like me, maybe are facing similar things, that just hearing the perspective of another dad might be helpful. So based on something that happened to me when my firstborn was born in the hospital, took me back to that moment, and I went, you know what? I think I need to create a podcast for dads. And I just want to bring out dad stories, and I want it to be a safe place for dads, hence the name Dad Space. So we say it's a podcast for dads by dads. It's been a really fun podcast to do.
That's neat. I know there's a story there, but I do have to back up for a minute and just ask you. I'm an empty nester as well. I had a longer runway, to use that terminology. With older daughter leaving and then son leaving, but coming back and leaving and coming back, leaving, coming back, and then youngest son just like graduate and gone in 4 days. Like, see ya.
Yeah.
That was sudden to me. And all of a sudden we were empty nesters. And I know how tough that was to try and figure out between me and my wife. How in the world did you have all three leave in a 3 month time slot and handle it? I mean, what was that like for you and your wife? And how'd you guys get through that?
It definitely brought us back together more. When you're a parent and you're balancing your time between work, family, and all that stuff, you really don't have as much time for each other like you do when you first are married before you have kids. So it's really kind of brought us together. The interesting thing was I saw it more as a victory that we had time back for the two of us, but my wife saw it a different way. She saw it as a bad thing for her because she was the one that ran everything, kept us on task, kept us their calendars running, get us to our doctor's appointments, our dentist appointments. She was it for all of us. And that's what brought her joy. So the fact that our kids left actually took her joy away. And it actually gave me joy because I thought we got time back. So we had two totally different responses to this. And I had to be very careful to not overplay the joy of having my time back and us being able to have time together, because she was in mourning, because she lost a piece of her identity when the kids left the house.
Yeah.
So I had to be very careful about her needs in that time and build her up while still celebrating the fact that I have freedom to do more things. It was a really interesting thing that was going on between the two of us. And that took a lot of conversation and a lot of time to kind of work through for the two
Yeah.
of us, how we could serve each other, how she could celebrate with me, and how I could mourn with her at the same time.
People who have never been through this, I don't know if they'll ever actually get it until they go through it.
Yeah.
Because I had heard plenty about it. And when my oldest daughter left, I had an idea like, oh wow, my kid just left. But I had two more, so it's like I almost had a safety blanket to like sort of lean into to handle the pain of my daughter leaving. And then when my oldest son left, it was like, okay, I still have my youngest son, so I still had that safety blanket. So mine was over a course of years. But even then, when the last one left, it was jarring. And my wife and I were just looking, we were sitting there on the couch one night, a couple days after they were all gone, and we looked at each other and we're like, hey, now what? Nice to meet
Right.
you. Yeah, how are you?
Yeah.
You want to watch some TV or you want to play? What do you want to do? You're going to read a
Yeah.
book? I don't know. Because all of a sudden, all of the, going to sports every night and making sure they had dinner and, what did they have? What did they need? And shopping for them. And because they were all three really active kids. And then you just sort of sit there and go, now what? So I
Yeah.
get the process, and I mean it's really good. A lot of couples have trouble with that, and they end up clashing because they're so upset about the other things that they clash with one another. But with you and your wife, you guys had the wherewithal to pull together and work together to get through that.
That comes from listening to great podcasts. That comes from reading great books and kind of being in a learning mode leading up to that, knowing that it was going to happen eventually. we were already having conversations, but it just, the fact that it happened so fast was the thing that really caught us off guard. We thought we had a longer runway, again, to use that term.
Right.
And the fact that it was really, really short. The one thing I say to a lot of young dads who are not even close to empty nest stage is every night when you go to bed and you shut off the lights and you lock the front door and your whole family is under one roof and the house is quiet, you make your way to bed. Remember those days because there's going to be a day when you're going to lock the door at night to go to bed and there's only going to be you and your partner, or maybe just you, and your children are off doing things which you that's the goal. We don't want them to stay forever and play video games in the basement. We want them to move forward and get their life going. But you will miss the days where everyone was under one roof and that peace and safety. Like I don't know where my kids are right now at this moment. I have
Right.
no idea if they've had breakfast. I have no idea if they went to work today. I I'll get a random text, but I'm not there in that role anymore. And that feels weird to go from a role of being responsible for my kids to being a support to my kids. It's a very interesting transition.
Yeah. I hear you. Well, you know what? You and I could sit here and talk about this all day. So let's pivot a little bit, and you've got a story as to why you started the podcast about the dad space in the first place. So, what made you say, "Hey, I want to do a podcast for dads. This is really important."
With the vacuum of time and all the kids leaving, that created space in my calendar. Again, like you mentioned, I don't have to
Mhm.
drive them to band practice or sporting events. So there was a some time game back to me. So I'm like, well, I'm going to start this Dad Space podcast, and the premise is all around something that happened to me with my firstborn. Go into the hospital. My wife's going to labor. Everything's busy. There's beeping machines and nurses scurrying around the room, and the doctor comes in, and I'm just standing there trying to stay out of the way, right, in the moment because it's not about me right now. And the doctor, jokingly to kind of break the mood, looks at me and says, "Now listen, here's what's going to happen. Here's what we're going to do. I would suggest that if you're going to pass out, just realize no one's going to catch you. Right now, we're here for your wife." He's trying to be, joking with me and kind of calm me a little bit. But one thing he did say in kind of a joking, off the cuff manner was, in this moment, it's all about your wife. There's no one here for you. And we both kind of chuckled, that, yeah, if I pass out and fall on the floor, no one's catching me. I get it. But the next day, we have our son, our family's come and gone. My wife is resting, and I'm holding him in the chair in the room, and I'm by myself in that moment. And what all I could hear in my head, Roy, was, there's no one here for you. And it wouldn't leave me alone. It was kind of like a wasp or a bee buzzing around your head. It just won't leave you alone. This thought that there's no one here for me right now. And I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm going to walk out of this hospital pushing my wife in a wheelchair out to the car and carrying my son. And nobody's going to follow me home to make sure I do this right. Nobody's going to check up on me to make sure that being a good dad. And the only resources I have is my dad, he was a great guy. But he goes home. He doesn't live in my city. I'm alone. And I'm like, how am I going to even do this? And I just came face to face in that moment that there's nobody here for you, that I didn't know what I didn't know. And that seemed like a mountain to me. And I didn't know how to even address it. So I'm like, if there was a podcast for a guy sitting in the waiting room about to walk down the hallway to become a dad for the first time, you and I are there for some other reason. But we see this young dad, this young guy, completely shocked and just so doesn't understand what's going to happen next. And if you and I, Rory, had a chance to encourage that person, what would we say to them? How would we help them? What would we do to give them comfort or give them some feeling that they can do this? Like, how could we do that? And if you and I could have a conversation for them, then maybe that would be the one thing that would help them to not experience the feeling of there's nobody here for you. I wanted Dad Space to be a spot where there was someone here for you in those moments. So that's why I started the show.
That's great. I love that. I was reading one of your write-ups that you had out there, and you mentioned, something to the effect of if what we're doing, if what you're doing can help one person, then it's worth it. And that's how you started the podcast. That's really how you feel about this, isn't it?
So a lot of things about podcasting people don't understand when they first start a show is the fact that a podcast can become a companion to someone else, where just the frequency of you creating content and being in someone's ears creates a bond, an invisible bond between a listener and a podcaster. I had somebody reach out to me a little while ago, Rory, about one of my other shows, and they said, I listened to your show, but not for the content. And I'm like, well, I put a lot of time and effort into this show. That's not what I want to hear. They said, I'm not really interested in the topic of what you're talking about, but what I do value is the fact that you show up every week and I have a relationship with you. You could read anything to me and I would listen to whatever you want to talk about. But you and I are companions. And I just want to say thank you for creating something. You could talk about anything and I'd listen. Now, this comes to a guy as a podcaster who, when I first started, I struggled with the sound of my own voice. I struggle with the idea that who would ever listen to me. And here I'm getting an email from a listener saying you could talk about anything and I listen to you. And I'm like, that bond between a listener and a podcaster or a content creator that you build over time. We create content, we put out in the world, but the fact that somebody values it that much, that they would listen to it, even if it's not a topic of interest for them, I didn't expect that at all. So I just see that we put out this stuff into the world and people will do with it as they wish. But I love that invisible connection between a host and a listener. I think that's amazing.
That that's the word. I mean, that's what every podcaster kind of hopes to have in their lives is that kind of a connection with their listeners. That's amazing that you actually had that interaction, um, out loud, so to speak.
Yeah.
Because you kind of feel like you connect with some folks sometimes, but to have that message sent to you is big. That's really big.
Right.
Congratulations on that, because I mean that means you're really connecting with people. And if one person feels that way, then there are other people who feel the same way. So you're doing something right in your podcasting, brother. I mean,
There's unlimited potential in that one. And when I go into Facebook groups and I hear people talk about I want 100,000 listeners and I want to do this and I want to do that, I'm like, what about the one? What about the one person? If you could connect with that one person, would you podcast for one person? And a lot of people I meet, they're like, well, that's counter to everything I hear in the space. We got to grow, we got to be big, we got to be fancy, and all these listeners. But would you podcast for one? I would podcast for one. If
Yeah,
one person's life was different, how do you measure that, right?
right.
So yeah,
Well, and a lot of us did podcast for one or two or just a few when we first started, right? I mean,
right.
that's when you put out 10 episodes and you're getting like five downloads, you're going, well, at least someone's listening to me, And that's I think a lot of people they minimize that. I hear people all the time, oh, I only had 10 listens on this one, and I'm like, you had 10 people who said, I want to hear what you have to say. Imagine sitting in a room and 10 people all walked in and sat down and said, I really want to hear what you have to say. Would you feel like you in a room with 10 people was worth saying it? And yet on a podcast, people go, well, that's not worth my time.
Mhm.
It's amazing to me. So I love your attitude towards it. And it's clear why you're being successful at what you're doing. You've been doing Dad Space for a number of years then. Yeah. Okay. And
Yeah.
about how long and how many episodes you got out?
I'm up to over 100 now for that show.
Nice. Congrats.
Yeah, and for that show, like a few years now, it's been about 2.5 years, I believe. So I try to do at least one a week, sometimes more. Every November, we have a challenge for podcasters called National Podcast Post Month. The hashtag is NaPodPomo, which is fun to say. But the idea is to do an episode every day for the month of November. For 17 years, this challenge has been out for podcasters. So this year, I did it for Dad Space. So that's 30 episodes in 30 days. And two of my other shows also participated. So I had three podcasts, 90 episodes in 1 month went out. for November. And for Dad Space, I focus not so much on the task of doing an episode every day to be part of National Podcast Post Month, but November is Movember, where we focus on men's mental health.
Right.
We talk about men's cancer. We talk about men's physical health. So I focused on men's resources for the month of November. And I had clips from Movember. I had um, things where you can support Movember and donate to the Movember cause and help more men. So I leveraged it for Dad Space, and we did an episode every day. And I got to tell you, Rory, for consistent growth for your show, and then all of a sudden November just went way up high
Hmm.
because again there was a daily episode. Really, they weren't long; they were like 5-10 minutes, but the content was there to support men in the month of November. So tying it into November National Podcast Post Month at the same time really worked really well. So there's been on top of the weekly releases, I do these special projects as well.
That's neat. No, I
Yeah.
like that idea. That's really cool. Just to, if for no other reason, just to push you outside of your comfort zone into, break down some new barriers. And then when you go back to your regular schedule, I assume it seems a whole lot easier after you've handled, 30 episodes in 30 days. There's people
Yeah,
right
a
now who are
little,
going,
yeah.
poof, I can't even imagine that.
Behind the scenes, if you're listening, you're like, how the heck do you do that? I started in August for November, just so you know. So I was already pre-recording, batch recording, and setting them to go live in November.
All
So I
right.
took a longer approach and didn't do it overnight, just so you know.
Truth comes out. You're
There you
revealing
go.
your secrets now because I'm
There you
I'm
go.
envisioning you just sweating and eating at your desk and like talking and having a sandwich at the same time. And
Right.
that's awesome. People just like they don't understand empty nesting. They really don't understand podcasting if they haven't done it either. They don't get what goes into it. They think you just sit down and have a conversation and go home, and they don't have any idea what actually goes into the behind the scenes. So, how do you handle the behind the scenes and all the work and everything else for 9 podcasts?
I talk to about 10 to 20 people a week in pre-interviews and recordings.
Great.
I also host a meetup for podcasters twice a week on Tuesdays and Saturdays, where we get together with podcasters from around the world and we encourage each other in community. Talk about having face-to-face time with your listeners. It's amazing to have people who listened to your episode last week now in front of you and we talk about it. It's crazy.
That's neat.
So I do
Yeah.
that on meetup.com. That was really fun. So I do that. I do a lot of batch recording. I have a lot of processes in place. When you've done this many episodes, you kind of get into a routine. So I try to do my recordings and my editing on the same day because it's fresh in my mind. And I try to get everything out as fast as possible. So two of my shows do 3 episodes a week. So that's been going like that for 2.5 years. So that's 6 episodes
Wow.
a week just for 2 shows. So I have to be pretty disciplined. And I have, like I said, I have a night job. So I'm listening to you, Rory. You keep me company at work. I work an overnight shift.
I
So
appreciate that.
so you and I work together, which is great. I overnights I work and I work in like in a warehouse setting with free Wi-Fi and I can have one earbud in, not two, but one, and I can listen to a podcast while I'm doing other stuff. So I get about 40 hours of listening time in every week while I'm at work. So I can blaze through somebody's podcast and listen to almost the entire thing in a week for those who have a lot of episodes.
Wow.
So I love listening to podcasts as well. I'm a big fan from a listening perspective.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I do that. So yeah, a lot of different processes in the background, a lot of automation. I'm a team of one. I don't have anybody else with me. So I'm doing it all myself too.
Wow. So, how many episodes do you put out every week between all the podcasts? I'm just curious.
Uh, 10 to 12 maybe, depending, roughly
Wow, that's good.
a week.
That's
Yeah.
some. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I want to get back onto some of the men's topics that we talked about, but for this
Yeah.
show, um, I don't want to necessarily go into a podcaster nation type of mode, unfortunately. But I'm talking to another guy who's passionate about podcasting. But real quick, do you want to list off your shows for everybody, just so in case they want to go check one of them out?
Oh, well, I can definitely do that. I'm going to have to pull it up so I can remember them all. So, okay, so let's
I
go
love
through this.
that. All right.
I have the Upcycle Canada podcast. So that's a podcast my wife and I started. That was my first podcast. And it was a podcast that we do. We have a business called Upcycle Canada. We repurpose things. So we take a piano, it's going to the landfill, and we turn it into a shelf. Okay. So it extends the life of the piano doesn't become waste, and we're not cutting down trees to build a new shelf because
Right on.
there's a perfectly good piano.
Okay.
So we do that. So we repurpose stuff. What do we call it? Upcycle Canada podcast. That was podcast number one. We started getting into side hustle conversations on that show
Mhm.
because we'd have people on the show who do what we do and they work on their side hustle. Anyway, so that turned into Living My Side Hustle podcast because it was getting away from what we just did here. We got away from the dads and we got into podcasting.
Right.
In Upcycle Canada, we got away from upcycling and we got into side hustle. So we started the Living My Side Hustle podcast. I'm a musician. So I had a thing with Spotify for a while where you could put music into your podcast. You could actually have full tracks in your
Hmm.
show. So that was part of a test they were doing. So I jumped on it because I love music. So I technically had a radio show on Spotify called the Add to My Playlist podcast. Still there, still works. I can't do anything with it anymore because they took that feature away. But I could talk about a song, play the song, talk about a song, play the song. It was really fun. So that was really fun for me as a musician. I had some Grammy Award winners on the show and everything too. It was really fun. That's the Add to My Playlist podcast. I have Living the Next Chapter, which is my author podcast. 530 episodes in 3 years. That one's really cooking, really doing well. I get a lot
Wow.
of people on that show.
That's great.
Yeah, so it's author podcast. I have my How to Podcast series. It's where I teach podcasting. I have guest co-hosts like Rory coming on to talk about podcasting from a co-host perspective. And I have daily Daves and all this kind of stuff. It's a lot of fun. It's all about helping you with your podcast. I have Dad Space, which we're talking about. I have a children's podcast called the Daily Santa Podcast, and it's 25 episodes in a row. And it's got some of the tracks. I know you do editing and stuff for it. Some of the episodes have over 25 to 30 different tracks in one recording. So there's voices, there's music, there's story, sound effects, right? All of this happening. It's 25 episodes in a row for children. It's all for kids. And it's the Daily Santa Podcast,
Nice.
dailysantapodcast.com. And also have the podcast editing and support show. I'm getting tired saying this. The podcast editing and support show, where I help podcasters find editors and I help editors to find podcasters. What does that look like? And then my ninth one I just launched 2 weeks ago and was recently featured on Pod News with James Cridland. It's the Canadian Podcaster show. I have an online magazine. It's not a newsletter, it's an online magazine where you can actually flip pages on your screen. And it's a digital magazine for Canadian podcasters because we need something here in Canada to raise the voices of Canadian podcasters at CanadianPodcaster.com. So there you go. There's my nine. That's enough of that.
Wow. I'm holy cow. Um, I don't know any other way to react to it except just to laugh because, oh my goodness, I cannot imagine how much work you're putting into podcasting all the time. I mean, you know what I love is that you obviously love it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, well, all right. First of all, you're officially invited onto the Podcaster Nation show.
Did I earn my spot,
Oh
Rory?
my
Did I do it?
goodness.
Okay.
You're going to be
Okay.
like
All
the
right.
expert guest. I'm going to have to save you
Yeah.
for like a episode 100 or some kind of, centennial thing. But we have to hook up after this and get something booked because I've got to hear all the podcasting stuff. Okay. And we can talk about all that on that episode of that show. But back to this show. Holy cow. Um, David, we talked about a couple of things. I know that you have talked a lot, and you just brought it up too about like Movember. Talking about men's mental health and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Let me get us back on our proper runway over here for today. But one of the things you mentioned is understanding your place in this world, men's mental health, and also talking about what matters most to men. All right. On this podcast, we have a lot of fathers and husbands. We have guys who are worried about this kind of thing. We talk about mental health. We also talk about things that can kind of help settle some of the mental health issues. But it's just not talked about anywhere near enough because at the end of the day, we don't want to be weak. We don't want to show everybody that we're overwhelmed or we can't handle something. So what is your stance? What's your message on these topics like we just talked about? Men's mental health, understanding your place in this world, what matters to men. What do you have to say about any of this stuff?
There was a clip I saw on TikTok recently that really, really hit me hard, Rory. And the people that did the clip came back later to explain more detail about what happened behind that clip. But for those who haven't seen it, there was a gentleman sitting outside on his step, and he was holding a spool of wire, and it used to be like electrical wire or something, but he was holding it and he's just kind of staring at it. And his wife kind of looks down at him from inside the house and is like, "What are you doing?" And he just starts talking about the spool of wire and the fact that it used to be so much wire on the spool. But over the years, the wire is getting, there's less and less wire on the spool. And he was just saying that, over the last 40 years, there's the amount of wires, it's gone. Like I've used it for things and it's no longer here. And I'm only left with so much wire on the spool, and there's going to be an end to the wire. And he was having this moment of realizing that there's less days ahead of him and there's more days behind him. And just the reality of I only have so much wire left on the spool as a symbol of his own life. And he's having this moment where he's really captivated by this and he's really trying to process it. And his wife says something and it seems kind of off the cuff. It seems a little harsh, like, "Oh, I thought you were gonna talk about your hat or something." And she makes some kind of comment that deflects from this moment that he's having. And you see him stand up in frustration that in that moment she just wasn't getting what he was trying to say, that he was really wrestling with what's left of his life and what does he have to show for it. And I thought, wow, how many men are struggling to explain what's going on inside of their mind and maybe not getting the support from others that they need in that moment, where people say something dismissive, people don't get that they're having this moment. What if there was a way for us to talk to that guy in that moment who's really wrestling with the fact that I'm getting older and there's an end. And one of the things I talked about on my show recently was draw a line, just a line, make it as long as you want. And the beginning of the line is when you were born, and the end of the line is the end of the line for you. And then put a line, put a dash somewhere on the line to represent where you think you are right now as your age and where you are in this world. And for some of us, empty nesters, our line's a little bit more to the end, to
Yeah.
more to the right of the line and a little less from the left, right? So then what you have left is the remainder from where you put that dash to the end of the line. What are you going to do with that space? And I had somebody on my show recently and we got into a conversation that when you look at a tombstone, you see a birth date and an end date, and then you see this little dash in the middle. That little dash represents everything that you're ever going to experience in life, from the birth all the way through your children, being a dad, being a grandparent, and then leaving this planet. That little dash seems so insignificant, but that's the whole purpose of our life is that dash. And how do we make that dash count? So when I see a dad wrestling with their own thoughts of either mortality and what their legacy is in this world, I just wanted to create a space again, dad space. I want to create a space where dads could get together and talk about that stuff and wrestle with that in real time so that when someone is listening who is also wrestling with that doesn't feel so alone. Again, there's nobody here for you. I don't want that to be for that person sitting on the step looking at a spool of wire going, this used to be, I used to think this wire was unlimited, but now I'm realizing it is limited. And what am I going to do with the rest of it? Right. So that's kind of the power of podcasting. What I love about podcasting, Rory, is that people don't know what you're listening to. So I can strap on a pair of headphones or earbuds and be listening to you, listening to this podcast and getting something that feeds me,
Mhm.
even though other people don't understand me. I can come here and get fed. I can come here for companionship, the sound of your voice. I can come here for the content and your guests. I can come here and recharge. And this can become my companionship when other people don't get me. So I wanted my show to be a spot where people felt like somebody got them. That's kind of the idea.
Wow, that's amazing. I love what you're doing. I really do. And I love the reason you're doing it. So power to you. And I hope you keep doing that podcast, brother. I really do. I love that point that you brought up right at the end, especially is that the podcast is a safe place. Nobody else knows what you're listening to. They can see what you're watching sometimes. You know what I mean? People can get in the way. They can see what you're reading, but nobody can get in between you and your headphones. You know, and if
No.
they look at your phone, they're not going to see it necessarily. It's like it's just one of the most personal forms of communication, and that cannot be stated any more powerfully than you just did. That is where, of course, I land with a lot of guys. It's, hey, reach out, you know, find a brotherhood, talk to other men who are going through this, listen to other men who have gone through it. You know, because trying to go have your spouse, just like this ad you're talking about, trying to unload all that on your spouse and have your spouse be your support system rarely works. Usually creates more issues. That's why I'm a big proponent of don't ever let them see you weak, you know, when it comes to that kind of thing. But you've got to have somebody. You got to have other men in your corner. You got to have that brotherhood, you know, of guys who have gone through it that you can talk to and lean on. Um, One of the things that you mentioned again in one of your write ups was, you know, what matters most to men. And I was curious what your opinion was on that. What made you write that line? You know, in terms of that, it didn't seem like it was going along with mental health necessarily. It seemed like it was more of a behavioral thing. You know, like understanding men understanding ourselves.
A lot of the time when I know in my social circles as guys, we get together at a family event or whatever, and we have our drinks, we're standing around the outside of the room or the outside of the party, and we're just kind of having surface level conversations. We don't really, how's work? How's a family? Whatever. And we never really we don't get beyond sports. We don't get beyond weather. We don't get beyond work. We
Right.
never really go anywhere with that. And I'm seeing, just again, to go back to the companionship thing about my podcast and someone listening, I see a lack of companionship. I see a lack of accountability for each other. I see us being more inwardly focused on our family and our busyness and taking our kids to sporting events like we talked about and being busy all the time and being so inwardly focused that we forget our neighbor who lives like right next door to us and we hardly ever have a conversation with them. But in those moments when you need somebody, you need somebody. And I think back to that chair in that hospital room, I needed somebody in that moment to walk in and go, I got you. Like, I'm a dad. I've done this before. I'll work with you. I'll help you. I'll walk with you. Here's my number. On those nights when you can't sleep because the baby's crying and you know what to do, call me. Like, I needed that kind of information. I needed that kind of connection with somebody. And there was no such thing as podcasting back then. It didn't exist.
Right.
So I could go buy a book, but it no, it didn't help me in the moment. I needed a person. I needed a person that I could talk to or be a part of. So when I see us in social circles and we're all surrounding the outside of the room, like I said, there's nobody asking the tougher questions. Like again, for men's mental health, some of the most put together, happy people are the ones struggling the most. They've got this great facade that you would never think that this person, that Joe, is struggling with his mental health because Joe's the life of the party. He shows up, everybody just lights up because Joe walks in the room. But meanwhile, Joe is just dying inside because nobody ever reaches out to him. He's got this safety barrier between him and everybody else. And that's his personality. But behind the scenes, Joe's breaking down. So if there was a way for us to talk to Joe and build him up, again, nobody knows what he's listening to. But we could be talking about men's mental health or finding help if you're feeling like you're having some really bad thoughts. If we could have conversations like that, so Joe could escape to that, find support, and then go find professional help
Yeah.
through our podcast. Like you're telling me that's not worth the time and effort to reach that one person. Like I had a gentleman on my show, his name is Mike. His wife told him that he was good for nothing and nobody cared what he had to say and he had nothing to offer this world. And she kicked him out of the house.
Wow.
He went to his hunting camp on his own and he tried to do something, unfortunately, that was really a bad idea. And he was unsuccessful. The next day, he pulled himself together, went down to his truck, turned on his truck to go back into town. And what showed up on the radio on his truck not a song, not Ariana Grande. It was a podcast that was recorded by somebody months before. And the host talked about something that gave him life. Mike found his purpose from a podcast, took a totally different path, and now he helps people, and he helps people find their purpose, all because of a podcast. Had that podcast not been here, Mike was on his way to do something else, to to come to a solution for himself. Had it
Mm.
not been that for that podcast, Mike wouldn't have been here. And that's what I'm like. I'm like, when I hear your show, Rory, and I know you're pouring your heart into the show for a reason, I'm just envisioning somebody who needs you in this moment, finding your amazing show, pressing play, and connecting with you and your guests, going, oh my gosh, I'm not alone in this world. I'm not looking at a spool of wire going, I have limited days left. I don't know my purpose. My kids are gone. I don't know what to do next. I just feel so alone right now. I go to family functions and I stand there, the drink in my hand, and nobody really cares to ask me how I'm really doing. But here's Rory showing up for me on a regular basis, putting his life into me. Now I have my person, and nobody's taking you away from me in this moment because even though I've never met you as a listener, I know you. And I know that you're putting a valuable content for me and you're trying to reach me, and you have. So I want to be that for people in this life. And if I can only do it for one person, do for the one that you wish you could do for the many. I wish I could do it for everyone, right? I wish I could have everyone listen to my show, but that's not going to happen. But if I could reach that one, if I could reach Mike in that moment where he really needs me, then it's worth all the time, effort, and everything that I do to put into a podcast.
Could not have said that better myself. Thank you for all that. That was very, very well said. And is that that vehicle for you? Is that dad space?
That's all of them combined. I think for
All of them.
me, um, dad space specifically to men. And one thing that's really interesting, Rory, I know when we as podcasters, we have vision for those who don't podcast. We have vision to who's listening to our show. So we kind of get some basic information about
For
who might
sure.
be listening, right?
Oh yeah.
Where they are, what kind of device they listen on, and male or female for my Dad Space podcast, specifically focused on dads, not men, all men, focused on dads, right? I've kind of narrowed it down to dads.
Sure.
67% of my audience are female
Really?
for the Dad Space podcast.
Wow.
So the one thing I'm going to continue focusing on dads, but the fact that 67% of my audience are female, the fact that they find value in this show brings me so much joy. There's nobody at the door saying, if you're not a dad, you're not allowed to listen.
Right.
Nobody keeps you from the content. So if you're a young man and you're not a dad, you're a grandfather or whatever, or you're listening as a woman to the show, the fact that you're finding value in the show makes me so happy. But yeah, I thought that was interesting that 67% are women.
I mean that's great to be honest because those women are listening for a reason. You know, if you're giving
Yeah,
tips to dads, they're listening to probably help their partners,
right.
which is that's a wonderful community to
Yeah,
be talking to, and not have to change your topic at all. So that's great. I mean that is to be able to reach that because you're always going to be available to dads. I mean it's baked right into the name, but to have that kind of reach is that's great.
yeah.
That's something. On our podcast, just under 30% of the listeners at this point are women.
Wow.
And that has always surprised me. It used to be under 20, but that's grown quite a bit. And so some of it is, the hate mail.
Hmm.
So, and if I'm talking about you right now, but
Mm-hmm.
no, just because some women like hate what we're doing, you know what I mean? So they want to listen just because they want to hate it. But by and large, most of them are very supportive, and looking for ways to either understand or help their husbands, significant others, that type of thing. So that's good for you. That's a neat stat for your show. I would never have guessed that in a million years.
Right. So my
Yeah.
encouragement for your listeners, Rory, as you're listening to us right now, and you're thinking, well, Rory doesn't really care to know my thoughts about the show. Yes, he does, and he would love to hear from you. So if you're one of the members of listening to your show, women listening or men listening, reach out to Rory. I know he'd love to hear from you and get your thoughts on the show. And what brings you back episode to episode. I'm sure he'd love to hear your thoughts. So please, Roy's going to have contact information to reach out to him, but make sure you do that. Podcasters love hearing from their audience. So as somebody from the outside, as a listener coming into your show, Rory, I'm just encouraging everyone else. Reach out to Rory. I know he'd love to hear from you.
Well, I appreciate that. Thanks for that. Now, if the phone starts blowing up, I'm going to feel really, inadequate because you came on one time and told everybody to contact me, and they're doing it. So I'll love that. That's that's great. Now we lighten things up because that's a very heavy and hard topic that we were talking about a few minutes ago.
Mhm.
In terms of men who get so far to the end, they're just done and they're contemplating not being here anymore. I've had a lot of men contact me from that position, but that's because I got there at one point and I shared that with my listeners and I got a lot of feedback on that. And so when I hear that kind of thing, we do have men who reach out. And so I understand what that's like to run into somebody who says something like what your listener did, to you about that situation. It's another case where, just like empty nesters, if you haven't been an empty nester, you don't quite get it. If you haven't been on this end of the podcast, you don't quite get it. And if you've never been that low, that beaten down, I'm not sure you can really understand what someone in that position feels like, but um, you don't have to have been there yourself to help somebody else, though. And I think that's the point that I want to make is that even if you've never really been contemplating those dark thoughts yourself, if you recognize somebody else is, you don't have to have a deep rooted understanding of it. You just need to be there for them. And you just need to say, how can I help? Do you need to talk? You know, when you hear from a guy like that in a podcast like you've got, and with your background and everything else, what do you say? What do you say to a listener like that? When you hear a story like that.
Well, again, it goes back to the name of the show. I'm just trying to hold space for dads, hold space for stories from dads, and create a safe space so the men can share their journey, right? So when we can get beyond the surface level conversation, even within a podcast, going back to that gentleman I mentioned with Asperger's, came on with his two autistic girls. He he schooled me on how to be a great dad. And one thing he said was, my daughters don't understand physical touch and they don't understand the words I love you. It doesn't mean anything to them. That's just not how their brain works. But my one of his daughters knows that him as a dad, that he loves acorns. So what she does on the way to school and on the way home from school is she tries to find as many acorns as possible. And she brings them to him. So he reached behind him and pulled out his glass bowl overflowing with acorns. And he said, my daughter doesn't know how to say I love you, but she shows me that she loves me. Here's my acorns. And he was so proud of that gigantic bowl of acorns. He started to weep on the show. And I'm like, Rory, I haven't heard a lot of podcasts where the guests break down in real time on the show. As a podcaster, I was relatively new to this experience as a host. I didn't know if we're supposed to cut the tape and take a break or what do we say? And he's like, no, 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 no. And he just talked about the love of his daughter in that moment. And that love comes in different forms. So don't make your kids hug you and kiss you and say, I love you if they don't have that wiring, but let them show and demonstrate love in their own way because it's going to come from a genuine place. And I'm like, oh my gosh, right? Now, every time I see an acorn, all I can think of is this gentleman and his love for his family. And I'm like, that is so amazing. So to have that kind of connection, let's go back to that social function, everybody just talking about sports. Here's a guy sharing his heart in front of a guy he just met on a podcast and us having a moment together and capturing that moment and sharing it for another dad who also is struggling to connect with their kids. Like that's what a podcast is all about. And that's what dad space is meant to be, is that safe space where somebody can have a moment like that without being embarrassed, without being fake. And let's get beyond the scores of the last football game. Let's talk about how you're doing. Like, are you okay? Like, are you really okay? Like, what's going on? Like, are you struggling with your money? Like, how are
Yeah.
the kids? Are they respecting you? Or how's your love life? How are you and your partner doing? Like, I want to get beyond the surface and all the stuff that we put out there. And let's talk to that person who hides behind the facade, right? And let's get in there and support them and really build them up. That's the idea for all this.
I mean, if you had that kind of an interaction on your show, brother, you've done a very good job of creating a safe space. So I applaud you once again. That's amazing. That story almost killed me just now. So thank you for that. But wow, wow. Um, that's what this is all about. That story is what all of this is about. That's what being a father's about. That's what talking about it is about. That's what you and I have been talking about for, the last hour is about. And wow. I mean, what an example of, leading your family however you have to, in that way. And for him to be leading that with his autistic daughter and encouraging that and then showing the appreciation and recognizing what the gesture really is. That's a present leader in a man right there. That's something. It's incredibly impressive. And he shared that on your show, man.
Amazing. I had
That's
no idea he was going to do that either.
wow.
No idea.
Wow.
Totally caught me off guard. Right. So
Yeah. Um, I mean, that is the help one person model. That's amazing. All right. Well, definitely going to have to listen to Dad Space more often because if this is your content, man, I'm hooked. I'm a fan. Um, so let me ask you this, just because we're talking about this anyway, if somebody wants to maybe share a story with you on Dad Space, wants to, have that kind of a thing, if they're listening to my show, they know how to reach me. If they want to reach out to you, maybe they're really connecting with you right now and your voice and your heart, and they want to reach out to you and maybe be on your show and tell your story. How do you want them to reach out to you?
very simple. It's just the name of the show, dadspace.ca, because I'm in Canada.
Hmm.
Dadspace.ca. The dadspace.com was like $20,000 to buy because it's such a neat. And I'm like, oh my gosh. My wife's like, heck no, you're
No.
not buying that. But dadspace.ca was a lot cheaper. But yeah, go there. You'll have links to my calendar. You can go right in there and set up time with me. We can have a chat conversation anytime. Doesn't have to be about the show. It can be about whatever. You
Yeah.
just want to unload on somebody and just have a conversation. I'm happy to do that. But all my links and everything are right there on dadspace.ca.
Beautiful. I'll definitely have that in our show notes, okay, so that people can reach you. There's I think there's another link, on your pod match. I'll make sure I copy that too. But I'm not going to have room for all of your shows, unfortunately. So can they link to your other shows through the Dad Space link? Is there a way to find that link or
Yeah, but my main umbrella for all of the things I do in podcasting is True Media
that's the one
Solutions.ca.
that's got it? Okay, give it that
And
again
that
because
has
I
a
was just
link.
talking over you. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, no, truemediasolutions.ca. And there's
Okay.
a little slash our podcasts. There's all my shows, and then I also edit for other people as well. So all of those shows, plus the ones I edit for, are also on that page. So there you go.
Okay, wonderful. So I know where that link is at. I'll make sure that's in there along with the Dad Space one. Hey, tell me about this other thing. So is this another side hustle, side business you do where you edit for other people? Because how many hours do you have in your day, David?
Yeah.
More than
I
me,
keep
apparently.
finding more hours. I don't know. People say there's 24 hours. I found like 10 more. I don't know where everybody's talking about.
How in the world are you
Um,
editing for other people now?
yeah, so I edit for doctors right now. I have a doctor in California, I have a doctor in Florida, and I just edit their shows. They just hit record. They don't have time or the expertise or the patience to do the editing. So they just record, throw it in a Google Drive, and I take care of the rest. So I have a doctor in California who is suffering through long COVID, and they basically lost their practice. They actually even lost the ability to speak
Oh,
because of the effects of what happened to them. So they're relearning how to talk. They're relearning how to get back into medical practice. They're a heart surgeon, and it's amazing to hear their journey. But so yeah, so I do editing for people, and I just do it as it comes in. I'm also editing for. I'm kind of building up this side of my what I do, and so right now I'm editing for free for a few people, and they're giving me back a reference as a result. But it's really exciting to do that for people and help them get into podcasting, especially if
yeah.
they don't have the ability to do all that behind the scenes stuff.
That's great. That's huge. I had no idea that was a side business of yours. I mean, that's and good
Another
luck
one.
with
Yeah.
that because holy cow. That's whenever on the Podcaster Nation, I always ask, a question like, what's your favorite part of podcasting, and what do you love the most, what do you hate the most? Number one answer on the board is for what you hate the most. I mean, 90, out of 100 times it's editing. Can't stand the editing. Can't stand the editing. Can't stand editing. And so you're over here going, "Hey, I'll do your editing for you." I would imagine if you put that out there, that would be a pretty good business to have because there's, I don't know, 2.7 million podcasters out there.
Right.
So, I mean,
Yeah,
that would
that's
be
why I
amazing.
started that podcast editing and support show for that reason. I can connect you with other editors. If it's not me, I know a lot of people who would love to help you. So that's the idea is I want to create that platform. What does a good editor look like? What does a good podcaster look like? Let's have a conversation. So that's why
Crazy.
that's there. Yeah.
Just crazy. David, I want to thank you for not only, being here, but for just the way you've shared everything. It's been so open and giving and honest to everybody. It's authentic. It's been really wonderful. And I know a lot of people in the audience are going to connect with you when they hear this. So thank you for that. But I'm gonna let you. There's one more, and I'm gonna let you have one more shot here because I don't think we got to everything under the sun with you. There's probably 8 more jobs, 15 more podcasts, and I don't know, 11 more hours in your day we haven't accounted for yet. But somehow, I know you can handle this. Is there anything we haven't talked about? Anything that we haven't touched on yet? You can go there with this, but just give one more sort of leave behind. What's one more yeah, piece of advice or tip or something that you want to say? One more leave behind for everybody before you literally drop the mic.
So what I would ask anybody, if you want to reach out, all I would love to hear from you is your best dad joke. Make it as stupid as possible. Okay. And send that to me at redadspace.ca. I love to spit my coffee out while I read a great joke or hear a joke. So any of the most stupidest dad joke you can come up with, please send it to me. I love those. So let's kind of turn it around a little bit. So please do that. Dadspace.ca. Your best, worst, most horrid dad joke that you can come up with. I love those. So please do that. So here's a story to end off because we all love stories, Rory.
Go for it.
Um, when my kids were little, my kids basically grew up on dirt bikes. So we've always had these little dirt bikes, little like from the 80s dirt bikes, like these 50cc bikes, no gears, just jump on and go, right? My youngest son couldn't even ride a bicycle, but he could ride a dirt bike, which is weird. But anyways, we would ride these bikes around our property and all this. And we got to the point where like, well, no, we're going to do family vacations where we go to a location and we ride brand new bikes. They teach you in the morning. They take you around trails. They show you how to go over trees and bumps and stuff and through mud. And then they take you for a trail ride in the afternoon. You have instructors with you. So there's 5 of us in my family. And then they have 2 trainers who come with us. So there's 7 of us on a ride together. So we go to this place. We ride around our properties, but I'm by no means an expert rider at all. Right. We're riding these little dinky bikes. They're just nothing. We get to this place and we're riding full-size bikes. So it's my wife, myself, and my 3 kids. So again, we go through the training, everything's great. We go on a ride, and they take us to this little area in the forest where there's like little mini hills and a little track. My kids are zipping around, they're having a great time. My wife's riding around with them, she's having a great time. And I'm sitting there kind of watching on the bike, and one of the trainers rides up beside me. And I'm like, I have my helmet on, so I can't hear everything, right? Because he says to me, come on, come with me. And I'm like, what do you mean, come with you? Where are we going? He's like, I can tell you're bored. Let your kids, the other trainer will stay here with your wife and kids. You come with me. I want to take you on a trail. And I looked at the guy like, I don't know how I impressed you enough to think you know what I'm doing, but I ride once or twice a year. I don't know what I'm doing. He's like, no, no, no. Come on. I saw you. I know you can do this. I've watched you ride. You'll be fine. Let's go. Stay with me. And he takes off into the forest. My wife looks at me and is like, where are you going? I'm like, I don't know. This guy just told me to follow him. She's like, do you know how to do this? I'm like, no. But he's like, I gotta go. So he's gone. I can hear he's gone. So I gotta go follow him. So I go on this trail. We were on for 45 minutes together. He took me on cliffs. He took me down into rivers, deep ruts, trees, rocks, all over the place. Rory, the whole time I was like just freaking out because if I don't keep up with this guy, I'm lost in the forest and I'm going to hurt myself. So he would go ahead of me, stop, and wait for me to catch up. And we kept doing this. 45 minutes later, he brings me back to my family and he drops me off with my family. And my wife looks at me. She's like, are you okay? I'm like, I don't know what just happened, but I just went on the hardest trails I've ever seen with an expert rider. And I didn't think I could do this, but he showed me that I could. And he looked at me and said, I knew you could do this. And he rode away. And I thought in that moment, Rory, wouldn't it be great if somebody rode up beside you and went, Rory, I see greatness in you. You're playing small. You're doing these little bunny hills and these little nice easy track. Come with me. I want to show you something that's a little more fun. And in that moment, we push back and say, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can write the book. I don't think I could be a podcaster. I don't think I could do the thing. But what if somebody looked at you and went, Rory, I see greatness in you. If you just trust me, I will take you on trails that you would never go on your own. But I know you can do it because you've already proven yourself. Let me uncover for you how great you could be. And let me show you something that's a little bit more harder than you might naturally do. But I have faith in you. Wouldn't you try something if somebody said to you, I have faith in you and I'll help you? And I think that's what I get from your podcast is I get you riding up beside me going, you know what? Here's your little life, and it's pretty comfortable. But imagine a world where you could do something so much more. And if you just simply trust me, follow the journey of this podcast, listen to my guests, and just trust me that I'm going to take you somewhere where you would never go on your own. I see greatness in you. And as long as you would trust me, I'm going to show you things you'd never see on your own. So that's what I see from you, Rory. I see somebody riding up beside me who's further down the path than I am, who has confidence in my abilities when I don't feel confident. And that's what I get from your show. And for everyone listening, that's what I want you to go back and listen to the past episodes because you're going to hear it come through Rory's voice. That's what he's doing for you in real time. He is an expert rider and he's coming up beside you, and you might not feel adequate, but he's going to challenge you to take a path you would never take on your own. And you're not going to do it by yourself because he's going to go ahead of you and he's going to wait for you at the top of the next hill and he's going to encourage you to get to the top of the hill with him. And then he's going to go further and you're just going to play catch up the whole time. But you're going to see things just by listening to this show and being part of Rory's community, you're never going to experience on your own. So please keep listening to this show. Keep supporting Rory. Keep supporting his guests because you're going to learn so much more about yourself. So that's my encouragement for you. Allow somebody who sees greatness in you to pull it out of you, even in little pieces at a time. Jump on the bike, click it into gear. Let's go.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Those were great parting words, and you're incredibly kind. Thank you for all that. I really mean it. That was really nice. And you're killing me. You're absolutely killing me right now. I'm, I've been almost in tears like 4 times on this show. You're killing me right now, David. Thank you for that so much. I mean, I felt that when you said that. I really can feel that. That was awesome. Thanks for that. You just put the bar pretty high for the next time I ask someone to give me a leave behind. Okay. I don't know if I can ask that question for a few episodes now because we got to recover. But David, thank you so much uh, for for everything, for everything you had to say about the show, and everything you've had to say to the listeners, and everything that you're doing for your own listeners. There are not enough of us out there who are listening to people and offering help, and doing it all with a servant heart. And there needs to be more. and people like us aren't competitors. We're part of the same movement in a lot of ways, but there are never going to be enough people in this movement, you know, for what the public needs. And I love that you're doing it. I love what you're doing, and hope you keep it all up. I don't know how you can with all your hours and stuff, but you might have to put an S on your chest next time you come up on the show, brother. Very, very impressive, and thank you for everything you're doing, man. Yeah. Okay. Folks, you've heard an absolutely wonderful episode of the Power Man podcast with fellow empty nester, uh, fellow host of the Dad Space and 9 podcasts, David Campbell. Um, Folks, the reason that we do this, the reason we bring these men on here with these stories is because if folks like us can overcome what's happening to us, then you know what? So can you. And that's why we're here, is to show you the way and to let you know that you do have value. You are worth it. And the fact of the matter is one of these days, you're just going to have to believe it. Till next time.